Hey, so I'm back with the whole Enneagram thing. It is kind of early. It's 9:49, so it's not as early as when I woke up. But this is Sunday, so it's been a bit of a slow morning for me, and just kind of like I spent a lot of time in bed, just like rolling around. But I've already gotten some stuff done. I'm like on the process of scheduling, seeing a friend, and then we're probably going. I'm with this friend to see another friend who just had a baby, and we're gonna meet, like the child, which is something that we've been kind of like talking since last year, but I'm not great at answering messages. She's not great at answering messages, so we've been kind of it's been occurring slowly. Also, she started like a new job and all that, so she was going through an adaptational period. So like now she's a little bit more available, but yeah. So back to the Enneagram. Tyler is a stockbroker who has worked intensively on understanding her type A personality. She recounts a childhood incident in which she could clearly see the development of this pattern. Much of my tenacity and toughness comes from my dad. I don't know why dad is capitalized. He always told me not to let anybody push you around. It was okay. It was not okay to cry. I learned to master my weaker side early on. At the tender age of 8, a huge horse ran away with me. When an adult caught the horse, I resolutely dismounted without a tear. I could tell my father was proud. And I mean, I had this specific situation going on, and also like my parents had never really incentivized me to suppress my emotions. Much to the contrary, they wanted me to talk. Although like sometimes people they want you to do something because they don't fully realize what that is going to be like. Because it's been kind of the case. Sometimes me speaking my mind it has been kind of uncomfortable. Sometimes because of the things that I'm saying, like there's that divergence in the way we think, or because some of like the things that have happened, in my life have been uncomfortable. They have led to some trauma, so there's like that element. But exactly, my parents were not kind of like incentivizing me to suppress my emotions, like her dad. But I do remember all the situations in which I kind of like really I established certain realities for myself. I have to be like this, I can't be like that, so on and so forth. Particularly the thing about crying, like it really resonates with me because when I was, tiny, you could say I was a bit of a crybaby, like I got kind of like, yeah, I cried. Also, not that much than like the average child, but I probably a little bit more than that. But that was something that happened at a certain point when I was like 7 or 8. I decided I wasn't going to be a crybaby anymore. I remember this because I was at this camp, and that camp it was definitely, I think it was definitely when I was going from first grade to second grade. But I do remember that in this camp I kind of established for myself that I will not be crying. Yeah, I think it was second grade because I talked about this extensively in therapy about how there was this certain situation that happened, and basically after that I kind of like was like I'm not crying anymore, and I kind of succeeded at that, and which was really bad for me because I was just repressing emotions. And eventually when I did kind of like start to allow myself to feel the things properly, it took a certain effort for me to kind of like unlearn the behaviors I had taught myself. But yeah, the thing about not showing your weak side, not showing any type of weakness, that is something I really relate to, really resonates with me. Not right now. I think I've been able to properly process things and become a person who is not repressed. And my life has been much better since then because like we're all things happen to all of us, so we're all gonna feel. And the easiest way for you to just go through something, for you to just prefer to just be able to just cross that out of your experiences, is to feel what is that thing. It's kind of like the feelings that that thing start, and then you just process them. And by that you have to for that you have to feel them. You have to really allow your brain to process the pain, the discomfort, the shame, the embarrassment, whatever it is. So yeah, so I relate to this. Like, my parents didn't really start kind of like. It is interesting because on one hand, it does feel like this is something that I did to myself, but on the other, I kind of like realized that the environment in which I was raised, it kind of like it led to that because basically I grew up in a very religious context. It was very there was always like that underlying, and then there were certain things that were not accepted, and then the best way for you to do that. It was there to, for you to assimilate what was being, kind of like forced down your throat, or, for you to just stand tall and just be like, no, I'm not gonna do this. But that required a lot of strength, particularly if you were a kid, to be able to stand up to, like the establishment, in this case, like in my case was kind of the church and my school to extension, because it was a Christian, school, and then, like my whole family is also Christian, so, there was, from all these fronts, I had these things that people were trying to, make me assimilate, and I kind of like realized early on that, I had to either keep that to myself, and just, be able to take all the jabs, all the prejudice, all everything, or I had to kind of like impose myself. But for both of those, I had to be quote unquote strong. And yeah, so it's interesting because my parents didn't directly, make me, tell me that I shouldn't, feel things, that I shouldn't show weakness. But, they did bring me up in that environment, and they did support, even if indirectly, the things that were happening, at church. So, it is kind of like they were kind of like indirectly responsible for it, like this change in my demeanor, in my attitude. And to this day, like that is kind of like how I am, like I don't really like, I think that, what has really changed is what I consider to be weakness, like what is okay for me to demonstrate to other people or not. And because, yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm more vulnerable, as I mentioned, but usually this vulnerability is not really, like, there are some things that I don't say because they make me feel vulnerable. It's just that the things that used to make me feel vulnerable, they don't have like that effect on me anymore. So I am okay with sharing them, and like them being known, basically. And as I said, even shown some very vulnerable sides of myself. But sometimes, like in that vulnerability, I kind of like find strength, which I know it sounds very contradictory. It's just that I don't know, like it's just that. There are things that they're always going to be like that. Like there's always going to be you. So you have to kind of like wrap your head around like that reality. Like that is going to be you. So like how do you react to the world when that is the case? And I think some of these inevitable things, I kind of like I use them kind of like, why is the same people have like carry your heart on your sleeves? Something like that. You do that, and you kind of like you expose your quote unquote weakness or your vulnerability, before somebody points it out, and then you kind of like you're, instead of like being made vulnerable, you're kind of like creating this other dynamic where that thing is no longer such a disadvantage, basically. So eights do not want to be controlled or to allow others to have power over them, their basic fear, whether the power is psychological, sexual, social, or financial. This is something that I really relate to. I think that I'm doing much better right now at this point in time, from ages 25 to 27. Lots of things changed when I turned 25. I think my brain finished developing, and as a consequence, like a lot of things became easier for me to do or not do. Not to say that there isn't still a lot that I struggle with. But basically, the thing of like not knowing should be controlled, is something that used to be like such a huge deal for me. That, as I talked about before, I would just kind of like isolate myself a lot of the time because like I feared that everybody around me was kind of like trying to control me. And I mean, I understand why I had that that behavior happened because. As I said, I grew up in a very religious environment. So basically, there were certain ways that you were supposed to be, and anything other than that was wrong. And then and they were trying to like really get you to be like that. So anything else, it was kind of like frowned upon, it was shunned away. And I happened to realize as growing up that I was some of those things. I was the them in some cases, and that was kind of like a bit of a challenge for me because like that was all I knew. High school was actually pretty great for me in terms of that because I as I said, I studied like in a Christian school where like everybody was a flavor of Christian. I mean, of course, some people were probably more Christian than others, but the idea was pretty much the same. That like there was a certain similarity to the way that things were perceived, and like since there were things that were kind of like exactly they were kind of like ostracized, there was also kind of like a pattern there. And as I said, I kind of like felt very constrained because everything I knew was that, because my existence was school, church, and then my family, which was all Christian, and then friends. Everything I knew was in that context, was in that bubble. So like when I went to high school, I went and I met people who thought differently, who didn't see some of those things as being kind of like bad, and who had thought the way that I kind of thought but didn't feel like I fully expressed. talked about this before, how Paradise Lost when I was 15 was such a game changer for me, because it allowed me to just explore certain feelings that I had, and to feel certain things that otherwise I wasn't really allowed to feel. But like that is kind of like John Milton, very classically Christian, so it wasn't like one of like the bad books or whatever. It was kind of like considered to be a good one. So finding solace in those words, in that context, it was kind of like a big deal for me. It was, it helped me, honestly helped me, like not only at the time being with like my afflictions, but also in the long run, because as I said, I was feeling very constrained, very limited, and very, like I didn't feel like I was fitting in. So, with that, I had, kind of like the future to look forward to. And, the future would be, great, because I didn't have to be that, tied up version of myself. But basically what I'm trying to say is that the way that a lot of things were taught to me in this religious environment is that this is the way that we all think. This is the way that it is intuitive for us to think. So if you think anything else, you are being, manipulated. You're being manipulated by the world, basically. And that was one of the reasons why it took me so long to kind of like fully leave the church, because I stayed there even after I kind of like realized I didn't really believe in the things that like were kind of like fundamental for me to believe in, because that's the thing. I felt whenever I was looking another way that like I was being manipulated, when in fact I was being manipulated by them. But that's just kind of like the reality. Like everybody's trying to manipulate you one way or another. Like they all trying to. Yeah, like that's pretty much, maybe they're not trying to control you like the entirety of existence, but they want to control your buying habits, like they want to make sure that you buy their product, like we live in this system, so that is kind of like, the way that things are. But it is like in much bigger ways, like everybody is everybody thinks something, and I think that like maybe most people are not necessarily trying to indoctrinate anyone, but there are still like conversations about things. They're kind of like a game, right? Like you're just back and forth between two different ideas. So I don't know, honestly, like the older I get, it doesn't have to do with age, it's just like the more I distance myself from that mindset, the less I see these interactions. But when I was younger, basically I saw anything and everything as people trying to control other people, including myself. Basically we were all just trying to control each other, and that was kind of that was the deal with life. But the point is that I really feared, I was very finicky about, like me being controlled by something. Whenever I felt like that was kind of happening, or there was a hint of that, I would just remove myself completely from that situation. I would just drop people, left and right. I would just kind of like ostracize myself in some cases, just I'm gonna be over here where nobody can control me. While like that in itself was kind of a form of control, right? Because if you're isolated from people, like have a voice, so the things you want to say, you're not really saying them. So there is like anything and everything you do, somebody is trying to make you do that. That's kind of like the reality of life, and you just have to make sure that whatever you're doing it because you want to. That is pretty much what you believe in, that type of thing. But anyways, much of their behavior is involved in also something that I was thinking about, like power is psychological, social, financial, and then there's also something sexual. And I remember I'm thinking about like when I was a youngling. I mean, technically I'm still a youngling, but when I was like thinking about 17, 18, and I started to have interactions with people of that nature, and how like I did try to find control, because I felt like my life was out of control. Everything around me was just, I was spiraling, and I couldn't find the grip. Everything was a mess. And I remember that I tried to find control, through those, sexual interactions. And it's interesting because of like the nature what I was doing. I mean, naturally there is pleasure involved, but I think I did much more because of the control element. Imagine that quote from Oscar Wilde: "Everything life's about sex except sex. Sex is about power." I really felt this at a point in time. But like this is my way of having some control, and like it did kind of help at a time. But it is good for me to just think about this, because I realize that right now I'm no longer trying to do that. Whenever I mean, for the most part, I'm pretty sure that like sometime or another, like that I regress to that, but for the most part, like, it's all about pleasure now. So which is why I'm not saying that is how it should be, because people have different agendas, they have different things that they want. So I don't think necessarily that's the right way. It's just that I feel like that's the right way for me to engage with these interactions. But yeah, anyways, much of that behavior is involved with making sure that they retain and increase whatever power they have for as long as possible. Yeah, I would say that this reads a lot like me. Not necessarily so much this past couple of, I mean, I think like I've been distancing myself from like this for the past couple of years, but it is something very telling, because when I think about the fantasies I have, how, you know, a lot of my old behavior is still maintained. So when I read this, I feel like this is not really me right now, you know, in IRL, but, you know, like, this is how, you know, things are working in my fantasies, basically. So, you know, and, you know, your fantasies are very telling about us and about what we want, about who we are. So basically, there's still truth to this, is what I'm trying to say. As innate, maybe general or a gardener, small businessman or a mogul, the mother of a family or the superior of a religious community, no matter, being in charge and leaving their print on the sphere is uniquely characteristic to them. Honestly, like, this is something that, like, as I said, years ago, I related to that. And then there was a period of time where I kind of like removed myself from like, from things in general. So like I was seeing less of myself, but you know, it is something that's kind of coming back. I remember talking about it the other day, the thing about legacy, you know, and how, I mean, the conversation went into the direction that I had with this person I was talking, like, and when I was, you know, in public transportation, and like, so the conversation went to a different direction, but the gist of it, what started it, is still very much kind of like present, still kind of like the case. And you know, I think it says something about me, because you know, the only time that I'm not really like thinking about it is when I'm like depressed. Not only just depressed, I'm depressed and at the point of giving up. I'm kind of like, okay, I have like nothing, I'm leaving nothing, you know, behind, but you know, like I need to exit right now, basically. But anyways, hold up. So 8s are the true rugged individualists of the Enneagram. Individualists, like, I don't think there's any question. I'm an individualist. Like, yeah, I think you could have like a 5-minute conversation with me, come to that conclusion. The rugged part, I'm like, I'm sure, yeah, sure. Anyways, more than any other type, they stand alone. They want to be independent and resist being indebted to anyone. Okay, this I really do relate to. You know, I don't think I've been talking too much about this in this particular channel, but like in the one I had before, this is something, yeah, it is interesting. If you were to look at the old videos that I have, you know, like, there was me talking, like, there was a lot more of this that was, you know, sipping through, you know, my commentary. I wasn't really trying to be anything or trying to necessarily, I mean, whenever I was assessing, but you know, even when I was not, you know, directly doing that, there was still, how to put it, you could still see that. You could see that was kind of like my essence, basically. But yeah, the part of like being indebted to anyone is something that to this day I still struggle with. You know, even if like a simple something, like you go out with somebody and they pay something to you, I always feel like the need and the urge to, you know, pay them back one way or another. I don't like things to just exist. I mean, maybe the exception being like my parents, I'm kind of okay with them giving me gifts, but like everybody else, I'm like, yeah, no. And even that is something somewhat recent. When I was younger, I think 18, 19, 20, like I really struggled with accepting help, even from them, you know, financial help naturally, but also, you know, just general help. But no, after a lot of therapy, and now I can, you know, accept it, thankfully, because I don't think I would have been able to make it without them. So shout out to my parents. But yeah, but the independence thing is also a very, it's always been like a very characteristic of myself, the need for independence and autonomy, and it's still the case to this day. You know, I think it's just that things that have been kind of like falling into place, because when I was like 18 to 20, you know, 20, 21 even, I was very, I don't know, like I wasn't really in a good place, like mentally and also like physically. Like I was struggling to, you know, have money for myself, you know, to make money. And you know, like right now I'm making my own money, so like it is independence. It's not everything's about money, but a lot of independence, it kind of like it comes from, you know, being able to just, you know, provide for yourself, because without it, like, you can't really call yourself independent. And I know that this can be kind of a controversial thing to say, But like that's kind of like how I feel about it. You know, like you have to be able to, you know, do things for yourself. Otherwise, you're kind of like being not hostage. That's very intense. But you know, you were not really, um, you know, like you're not really free, basically. So I think that independence it starts with financial freedom, and then you know there are other types of freedom that come from there. You know, and I mean, not even like it's not even the financial independence. It's like the most important one, but it's the most basic one. Because without it, like you cannot really do anything. So you need, you know, that. But anyways, but you know, the point about being independent has always been the case, being like an issue for me. To a fault, like I have definitely made choices, you know, and you know, following certain paths in the past, you know, pursuing independence that were not really good for me. But honestly, I can say I regret them. You know, some of those things that I said, like, I usually regret more what I didn't do than what I did do, because what I did do is, you know, already happened. I'm here, you know, and I'm fine, kind of. So, you know, ultimately, like, it didn't have, like, a devastating effect if I'm still here today, right? Without dealing with, like, any of, like, the possible consequences. But anyways, they often refuse to give in to social convention, and they can defy fear, shame, and concern about the consequences of their actions. I will say a lot of that might have to do with me being bipolar and having ADHD. Like my filter is not as good as some other people's filter. You know, for ADHD, that's already kind of like the baseline. And then, you know, you had me being manic, for example, and certainly I do not give a fuck. I don't fear, I don't shame, and I'm not concerned about the consequences of my actions. But you know, I do think that an element of that is because you know, the thing about mental illness is that it is a part of you. Mental illness and neurodivergence is a part of you. You know, so like that is you. You can remove yourself from like that. You know, you can't really separate. I mean, you can, you know, like the thought exercise, so you can, you know, see like what you can fix and what you cannot. But the way that I behave, it is affected by my ADHD, and that is just me. You know, what I'm trying to say. So basically, but yeah, the whole thing about not giving in to social convention has always been something that is, I guess has defined me to the point of, you know, contention. You know, I've had struggle with, you know, people before, and you know, as I said in the past, I was very, you know, I don't even know the word I'm looking for here, a very implacable, is that a word in English? But what I mean is that like, was it that way, is it my way, or you know, the highway? Very much, you know, I would find a way or I'll make one, that type of thing that have tattooed on me. But it was very much like, you know, you're either, you know, here with me or you're not. The door is right there. You can't leave. I think that these days I have started to show a little bit more leniency with some people, namely some relatives. You know, I'm thinking specifically of one of my grandmas, you know, my dad's mom, and my dad's, you know, sister and brother-in-law, my aunt and uncle, because they think some things, you know, and I'm spending more time with them, and by that, because of that, I'm coming to learn some of the things that I suspected to be true before, but now I know for a fact that they are. And you know, it's something that I think 5 years ago I would absolutely, like, I would have, you know, cut any contact with them because of some of the things that they believe in. But at this point, I'm like, let's just live together, I guess. Of course, if they, you know, like say something, I have never in my entire life been able to shut up when somebody says something I disagree with. You know, particularly if it is not something like, you know, like one of the things, because we cannot have different opinions and cannot coexist. Some opinions they infringe on other people's rights. So, you know, whenever people they have opinions like that, I've never really been able to shut up, and that's always been the case. And honestly, I'm happy with that. I'm happy that I'm able to stand with my convictions, that I'm not somebody who just caves in. So I'm proud of myself for that, and that is the case to, you know, today. What's been happening is that like a lot of my interactions, we're not really talking politics or relation, you know, and that's kind of that, because they do, you know, I feel like it's very clear to everybody who knows me where I stand on issues, and even, you know, issues that we have never talked about, I'm pretty sure they can guess what I think. And you know, like I kind of know what they think in some cases. I mean, I don't know the specifics in a lot of the time, but like I kind of come to realize that I'm not even sure I want to talk about those specifics. And also I kind of like come to realize that even though people, they have, you know, thoughts, like there's always a lot of exceptions to the thought. What I mean by that is that they might think that something is wrong or whatever, but like if I'm the one presenting that, they don't really say anything. They kind of like just accept that. And that's, I guess, as good as it's going to get, because I spent so much of my time existing. It was just for me, just trying to have conversations, to have discussions, to try and change people's minds. And what I've come to realize is that people's minds, they won't be changed unless they want you. So, you know, like you have to And a lot of people that, particularly like when they're older, they don't want to change their minds, they don't want to change their ways. And for me, I'm like, let me just wait for them to die. That's kind of like what I think. Which is why I think like some people having some, for example, like an 80-year-old having a certain opinion, as opposed to a 50-year-old having the same opinions. Like I have different takes on that, because the 80-year-old is almost dying. So like that person's going to die, and then is going to die with them. But like if you're 50, that's like 30 more years for you down the line for you to just think and say those things. It's even worse if the person is like 20 or 30, but anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that so like I don't really, I struggle to have to face not to face, but to really think about the consequences of my actions. And that has to do with like some other inherent things about me, I know. But there's always also kind of like, it's not that I don't think, because sometimes when I'm married, for example, I don't think about the consequences. Like it's not something that occupies my mind. But I think in the general sense of the word, like I was talking about how there's some things that like I would do, that I have it's not that I don't have any control over myself, that I don't want to have control over myself. I don't want to, take a step back when I see something or when I hear something, and that's kind of like just that. But anyway, yeah, I'm not really gay. I don't really, particularly now, like even when I was younger, like I even when I had certain issues with some of like the ideas and ideologies being, passed down to me from my environment, like there were some things that like I didn't really, there was some of those things I wouldn't really think too much about them, because I knew that there would be like there would be a point where there'll be some contention, some conflict, and also because I think for many other issues there was a certain leeway. So when we're talking about misogyny, racism, xenophobia, religious intolerance, like those things, like I like in theory, like the environment was kind of like, yeah, let's not have those types of bigotry happening. And then some of them, some bigotries, they were kind of like somewhat acceptable. Although I will say that the environment in which I grew up, specifically like the church I grew up in, it was less, they talked less directly about, some of these specifics. So it was always very kind of like understated, which, it is, I guess like it's better than being like something that is overtly said, like, on the Pope. But it's also like not ideal. Particularly because then it makes it really harder for you to have these conversations, and this is something I experienced a lot when I was talking to like my parents and like family friends about, the things that were being preached, but like not directly preached, they were implied in the preachings growing up. They'll be like, but nobody ever said that. And I was like, yeah, but what about this thing? They said that, when you say this, you're pretty much implying this thing. But then people, gives them some plausible deniability, and then, like nobody takes fucking responsibility. So it's frustrating, but many things in life are frustrating. People are frustrating. Like I don't think I ever met a person who I didn't find frustrating to some degree. So just adding it to the line basically. But yeah. So anyways, although they are usually aware of what people think of them, they do not let their opinions of others sway them. I like to think that this is true, and I think that it's interesting because this is definitely like not true. It's definitely true when I was like younger. When I was like a teenager, I was already, like I have this version of myself that I want to be, and I want to be perceived this way. So I was perceived some other things that I was perceived as. Like I really didn't care as long as like this is happening, this that, and also like I think, but more important than being perceived that is just doing things that let people perceive you that way. So it wasn't just about being perceived that way; it's just that like the consequence of my actions. Basically, being perceived a certain way, I behave a certain way, and then I'm held as this thing. But there are like so many, like simple things that I think when you're thinking about like things, that, the way people think about you, like in a negative connotations, there are like a bunch of those things that I honestly didn't care when I was a teenager. I still didn't care when I was younger. I think it was from a couple of years ago to now that I started to be more open to the possibility, not the possibility of like those things being said, but thinking about what that meant. So for example, and that was really great for me because there were some things that I was really scared of being perceived as, because I was really scared of being that thing. So for example, being kind of like ineffective or incapable or incompetent, or I don't know, being a loser, specifically in the context of like me achieving things. So like those were things that like I really didn't want to be perceived as, and I didn't really want to be, and as a consequence, I didn't really want to be perceived as those things. And even when I felt like I was those things, I still tried to maintain kind of like this, balance where I wasn't perceived as those things, that there was something there. And I think that with time, I've kind of like stopped to do that. I also stopped caring. Like I generally don't care. There's a lot of things that like I was kind of like very, resentfully like not caring, and right now I just like it doesn't bother me, so I am at the point where I care the least about people have to say. And yet, for me to get to this point, I had to open up and care at first for what people had to say. It's kind of like I was in this limbo, and then I went to like one extreme, and now I'm at not the other extreme, because like this sounds like unhealthy, but like I'm kind of like at a good place. So basically the point is that like at any point in my life, I would read this and be like, yes, I do not care about what people think. But right now it is definitely the point where I care the least. And also they're saying that let the opinions sway them. Even honestly, like this has always been me. Even if like people think a certain way, like if I, particularly when I was younger, like I had a path that I wanted to follow, so like I never really deviated from that path, at least not because of what people had to say. Like sometimes you're course correcting, and that is perfectly acceptable, and that's like there's no issue there basically. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is that this way never happened, and then the caring, I don't think I'm kind of like aware. Am I aware of what people think? And that's an interesting thing for me to think about, because I would say that because there were certain things that I wanted to be, so I think I was aware of what people thought about like those things. Like anything else, anything other than that, I think it was more like up in the air. I was less, I was more. I guess I didn't really care, but I don't know, I don't think anybody has ever said something about me that I was like, oh my god, that is shocking. I could not see that coming. Particularly because a lot of times, like, people value things, the way that they interact with the world is very telling of what they value, in themselves and in what other people as well. So, like, when it comes to, what people are going to think, it's kind of like, it's somewhat easy for you to just be like, yeah, this person cares about this. So, when it comes to me, they're going to think this. That I am this, regarding like this particular, trait or characteristic. Anyways, although they go about their business with fastidious determination that can be awe-inspiring, even intimidating to others, I find that this is more true to myself in the past. I've been kind of like just floating around lately, like it's not that I'm not determined, but just that I have nothing to be determined about, basically. That's been the reality for the past couple of years. And honestly, like, I don't mind it. I think that 1-year-old me would really mind if I was just floating, in the ether like this. But like 27-year-old me is just like, one day at a time. Like, I don't even know if I'm ever going to get to the point where I'm going to find something that I'll be like passionate about again, that for me to get determined, to just get through that. Although to some extent is fear physical harm, far more important is the fear of being empowered or controlled in some way. That is very true. Like, I think like physical harm is something that like, that is a problem I don't care about as much. It's not common for me to just go about my way, and then let's say it's like it's dark and I'm kind of like alone, and like just me being like just waiting for somebody to come so I can, I'm fully aware that like I don't think I have a chance. But I don't fear it as much as I should, and that is not only when I'm manic, or when I'm depressed. I'm kind of like embracing danger, because it can be in the end. And here, when I don't really think, when I think I'm invincible, it is just like my normal, like not being physical things. But that doesn't mean I'm not filled with fear. Much the contrary, fear has for many years, for a long time, been kind of like one of like the little emotions in my head, even though I didn't want to acknowledge it. I was scared. The future, what's going to happen. I was scared that something bad was going to happen. By bad, I mean, like I wouldn't have been able to achieve my goals, my objectives, that something was going to stop me. I was scared that, some of the demographic factors that, make me, like they will be an impediment to the future, that I'll face, I don't know, discrimination, that type of thing. So, yes, physical harm, not huge, that up in my list of fears. But yeah, but being, as I said, disempowered. Honestly, I feel like being disempowered was, something, that is a good way of putting it. Like, I never really, because that's the thing about, that's that discrimination, because you kind of like lose some of your power. So like that, yeah, like that, honestly, like that is a great way to put it, just, adding to my head, when I have to talk about things in therapy in the future, like here's a great word that I'll probably be using a lot, or control in some way. It's extraordinarily tough and can absorb a great deal of physical punishment without complaint, a double-edged blessing since they often take their health and stamina for granted and overlook the health and well-being of others as well. Okay, I really do relate to this. I think that I'm doing much better, in regards, to that. Like I'm not really, like demanding more from people than they can offer me. I'm not, as a consequence, I'm not getting frustrated. So I'm getting less frustrated because I'm kind of like meeting people where they are at, nor where I wanted them to be. Because as I said, like I'm kind of like holding myself to, like a higher degree of like, particularly like physical, and I don't know, I think that right now I'm doing the best in terms of like not, if I see that like I'm not well, like I'm taking care of myself, like this is important, but like for many years that wasn't really the case, and that's why I think my mental health got in such a bad place, like got such extreme low, like I hit such a hard rock bottom because I wasn't really, paying attention, or maybe I was just kind of like pushing it away as like a non-issue. So yeah, I relate to this, but I think I'm doing like much better. And also like, this is also interesting because, as I said, like I've been kind of like living a very peaceful life. I'm kind of like removed from like a lot of situations. I'm kind of, like some things like they don't feel like they apply to my life right now. But I can say my fantasies, that's still the case. There's always been, like the case. Or like me just kind of like priding myself in my endurance. Not so much anymore because I went to a point where I'm like, wow, I don't want to feel unnecessary pain. So this was the whole journey from me, like not acknowledging pain and not really looking for myself like health wise, and just taking it without any further thought about what that meant. So just me right now feeling the smallest amount of pain and just being like, no, we're addressing this because I don't want to feel pain, basically. Like that's the biggest change that happened. I don't want to feel pain or discomfort or like anything. Of course, like some things you're always going to feel discomfort, that's a part of life, but not unnecessary pain, unnecessary discomfort, unnecessary anything, because like sometimes we just push through things, and like we don't have to push through them. Like there's a better way of doing it. So I can definitely see this being something bad, but I think I've been able to win this. I've overcome this. Yeah, but it's interesting because I was talking about strength in the other video, about how it was really important for me to be strong, to perceive myself as being strong and to be perceived as being strong, and what exactly like that meant. And it's interesting because like mostly what I wanted was like not physical strength, wasn't strength of character, I guess, strength of will. I wanted to be able to achieve the things I wanted, so I needed strength to do that. But sometimes the same way that I was doing the whole power thing with sex, I was doing the whole strength thing with physical strength. So like I was I would push through some situations where I was like physical pain and just be like, whatever. And that was something that kind of like it filled my soul with contentment, not because I like pain, much the contrary, I hate it, but it just made me feel like I was strong. So if I wasn't feeling like that, I was strong in the context of me achieving my goals and being able to become the person I wanted to be. I at least had strength in this particular context, and kind of like made up for it in a certain way. But anyways, yet they are desperately afraid of being hurt emotionally and will use their physical strength to protect their feelings and keep others at a safe emotional distance. Oh my god, I'm just talking about this in life, no need to add anything. And I would say also like the thing about being hurt emotionally is kind of interesting because like in retrospect I'm like, yes, I was scared shitless, but at that time I felt like I was invulnerable. I felt like nothing could stop me, nothing could get to me. But then I realized that my actions were very reactionary. I was kind of like keeping things at an arm's length. Everything was there because I was afraid of being hurt emotionally, and also I already was being hurt emotionally by like a lot of like different things. And as I mentioned this the other day, like sometimes I couldn't really look away. Basically, I couldn't really get myself out of the context in which I was getting hurt, because I felt like I had to prove myself, basically prove that I was strong. But anyways, Beneath the tough facade is vulnerability, although it has been covered by a layer of emotional armor. This perfectly describes how I used to be. I like to think that right now, as I said, like I'm using my vulnerability as kind of like an armor, and it works. And I think that's healthy. I don't think that is unhealthy, actually. But well, basically that is kind of the thing. As I said, that was vulnerability, which is why like so many things they triggered me. And it's interesting because like when I talk about things triggering me, like I usually use it specifically in the mental health context, right? And like I was using it like back then as well, but I wasn't fully kind of like absorbing. Like it was kind of like I was masking. So things that were affecting me, but I wasn't like engaging with them at a level that allowed me to properly process them. It was just they were there and then it hurt me, and then I pretended that they didn't hurt me. And then that just led to like this kind of like snowball effect of me getting really really bad, like health wise. Being burned out at a very young age, having like really my mental health being just in the gutter, at the gutter, on the gutter. I don't know which one is it. Thus, AIDS are often extremely industrious, but at the price of losing emotional contact with many of the people in their lives. Once again, very true to me for like a long time. The both industrious part. I mean, right now, I think I the past couple of years, I've learned to, to embrace nothingness in the context of like doing nothing, which was something that I've always struggled with. I've always needed to be doing something, and that was my key to, be able to process things. I wasn't really processing them, but I gave this example, for example, how I was in middle school and high school. My schedule was like filled to the brim. I had, a lot of like school stuff, but I had extracurriculars, I had my hobbies, I had my interests, and basically my schedule was like super filled with everything. And because of that, I was in this cycle. I was kind of like keeping myself on my toes basically, and I was able to keep producing at a really high rate. And that was kind of like the thing. But I don't know if like I mean, this is an interesting connection. Like I was being industrious, but at the price of losing emotional contact with many people. I didn't really think about it that way, but both of those things were happening. Some of it was like very intentional from my part. Like I pushed people away. I mean, that had to do with trauma. I talked about this before. Had a very traumatic situation happening when I was 13, and then I didn't really know how to deal with it, so I dealt with it very badly. Not like in a way that like I guess jeopardized my future. I mean, at least thinking about my future in terms of like my academic or professional life. Although like you could definitely argue that things would have been better if that hadn't happened. But it did happen. There's no point in me just playing this game of like, what if it hadn't happened? So I'm not just gonna embrace the fact that it did happen, and that is pretty much all I have to show for it. Which is great that right now like I'm over that thing, so it doesn't have the hold that it once had on me. But it is undeniable that this thing of like losing emotional contact with people, I haven't really been able to overcome that. Not overcome that, but like I lost touch of people, and I stopped getting in touch with people, with new people. So I kind of like lived this very alone life, and I would say alone, not necessarily lonely, but like right now, it is kind of a struggle. Like I say, 2019 I think was when I decided to like start re-exploring my social life, because before that I didn't really have much. So like when I started, I was in a lot of like different scenarios and different situations, but I wasn't really engaging with them socially. And a couple of them, it's not that I regret them, but I was like, I wish I could have done that differently. I had like a couple of situations where I met some people who were like, I have something in common here, like we could be friends, and then I removed myself from the situation, and I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, like that could have been something. It wasn't because I didn't really explore it, but it could have been. Yeah, but like, so in 2019, so I started engaging more with the people I went to college with, like particularly in the second semester, and then I reached out to a friend from high school, and we to this day we are interacting. Of course, like I'm not the best at interacting, so like our interactions are very sparse, but she is okay with that, I'm okay with that, so pretty interesting. And like I do like see that, because I think for the most part, like I'm not really noticing that I'm like emotionally stumped when it comes to that I'm socially stumped. That except when I compare to some other people, namely my brother and my cousin, who I've been spending more time with, and I'm seeing that they all have like their core group of friends. For example, my brother went out with a friend yesterday, someone he hadn't seen since his first year of high school. He's in last year. And yeah, so he has like a lot of different friends, and same with my cousin. They both say that they don't have that many friends, but like that is, like they have like 2 or 3 more than like I say I have. I've been thinking about how many friends I have. There is this, friend, the one I got to high school, I went to high school with, and then there's some other friends that I met through her, who I won't call my friends. There's also been recently, this girl I went to middle school with, no, elementary school with, and then we've been meeting. I introduced her to this other friend, and now like they're friends, and our friendship is still kind of like stumped. And then there is this other friend, that is the daughter of someone from church my mom goes to. Now she's my friend, but it is a somewhat recent development. It happened like earlier this year or like last year. So they don't have like that many people around, and even all of these people, I don't really talk to them very often. Oh yeah, and I'm also talking with a girl I went to. She went to like kindergarten, elementary, and middle school with, and we're thinking about meeting. But she's as kind of like slow at answering as me. So like we've been talking about this since like last year, the end of last year, and then we're still not meeting. But like that works for me. It's just a lot of contact. It just makes me feel very overwhelmed. So this is pretty much what I mean. How I kind of like I made myself be used to a certain reality, and then right now I struggle with it to this day. I struggle if I have to message somebody every day. Like that just feels very suffocating, to me. So I haven't really been able to overcome that. And I think it's because I'm not used to it. I just make myself not being used to it, because I used to have friends before some traumatic experience, and even the year after that. But I did keep them more at arm's length. And when I moved to a different school for high school, I just kind of I ended contact. And the people I went to high school with, like we interacted more second, third year. And then like after I left, I kind of like also lost contact, because that's been me since at least since like that traumatic situation. Like I meet people, we interact, and then whatever that reason that we have to be in contact, be it we have class together, we work together, like interactions, they're over. And to be fair, most like only majority of people that I've interacted, like I didn't really have the interest of like furthering like our connections. But it still is worth saying something. That like I, to this day, I kind of like struggle with maintaining contact with people. And I think and this is something that sometimes I think, because like there was trauma that prevented me from engaging with people, but like the trauma, like I've dealt with it. So like what is the issue now? And I come to the conclusion that it's not that anything wrong with me or with like interacting. It's just that I was made, I make myself unused to something. And like get used to it, is something that first of all I didn't want for the longest time. Now I kind of do, but it is going to take some effort on my part. But the thing is, like any effort, it just feels like it's too much, and that's very overwhelming to me. So I don't know. And I also have like better moments than others. For example, when I'm depressed, I don't want to see anyone. And because I'm constantly going up and down, like there's a lot of like that happens. As I said, I think the people around me, they kind of get it, that like this is how my brain works, and that's kind of like where I'm stuck at. But I don't know, interesting feeling just right now I'm having. I realized that I don't want to die. And I know this sounds like very, I know from a different person this would be like, okay, no shit, but for me that's kind of unheard of. Not unheard of, but like it's unusual at the very least. But anyways, those close to them may become increasingly dissatisfied with the state of affairs, which confounds AIDS. I don't understand what my family is complaining about. I bust my hump to provide for that. Why are they disappointed with me? I would say that I'm at a point, as I said, that I have the people around me, they kind of like get me, and it's kind of hard to get to this point, because a lot of times people, they're used to something, they are used to the way that they are, and they expect other people to be just like them. So if you're not, that's the whole thing. So basically, I don't think people are dissatisfied with me, thankfully. But the whole thing about being satisfied, there's been a time when that was the case, and I mostly did the thing where I just dropped them. When in my late teens and early 20s, that was kind of like the way I operated. But I will say, like, I do understand why people will be complaining about this. I understand people have needs, they're different than mine. So I mean, I think like 18, 19, 20-year-old me would be much more like, yeah, I don't fucking get it, because I didn't want to fucking get it. So I was kind of like in that mental reality. But myself right now, like I totally get what like that. And I think that the key is honestly the whole mental health thing. I think it helps a lot for me to just be me, because people kind of like get that, like I'm not always there, mentally, so they don't expect me to always be there. So like definitely very helpful in maintaining relationships, you know. But yeah, anyways, when this happens, it's feel misunderstood and may distance themselves further. In fact, beneath their imposing exterior, it's often feel hurt and rejected. Although this is something they seldom talk about because they have trouble admitting their vulnerability to themselves, let alone to anybody else. Wouldn't relate to this. Right now, I'm doing much better. I'm, able to acknowledge things to myself, should admit to things, and as a consequence, I'm able to, work on them. But this really feels like, honestly, I feel like reading this, it feels like not so much like how, some people, they never really learn, they never really work on themselves, so they may be 50 and still struggling with this. But for me, it feels like, how you are in your time, like this particular material is for you in your 20s, but yeah, but I will say that the whole thing of like feeling hurt and rejected is something that I kind of relate to. Not right now. Right now, I feel appreciated and loved and all that. But I think before I started having this dynamic with my parents, my family, my friends, like people around me. Like I think there was a lot of that, of me feeling that I wasn't being appreciated, and that I wasn't, getting, I guess, like the respect I deserved, or that, people were, doing things carelessly in a way that, affected me. And right now, not so much, because, if somebody does something, I will talk about it, even if it means me being vulnerable with them. And then the consequence, that thing doesn't, it kind of stops happening. So, like magical scenario. Okay. But yeah, but like I relate to this, but like not so much the past couple of years. Because they fear that they will be rejected, divorced, humiliated, criticized, fired, or harmed in some way, it's contempt to defend themselves by rejecting others first. Yes, like that one like screams, like me, when I was younger, when I was like in middle school to like high school. I mean, it's not to say that every interaction I had was like this, because a lot of them was just like a lack of interest from my part. But like this, honestly, even before my trauma, to be completely honest, this is how I operated. So like this is very me, like I'm going to, and also like as I said, it isn't so much like me right now, because I don't care about being rejected at this point in time. Like that is not something that keep me up at night. Like I really don't care. Not in a very aggressive, like I don't give a fuck. It's more like, yeah, like you can't reject me. That doesn't really do anything for me. And I think that has to do with the fact that I'm like as confident as ever, even though I'm more vulnerable, and I'm sharing that vulnerability with people. Like I care about some things less, including that. Like none of those things, like they kind of, I mean, of course nobody wants to be humiliated, but like I've had, I have never been like being publicly humiliated, so I don't want to say that I wouldn't care about that. But like all the other ones, having people like you should express like your interest in having somebody be like, I'm not interested back, like that is something that like I've been through, and that it is easier. Like I think that even when I was 18, that was not something that it kind of like got, it might bug me a little bit, like why don't you want me, particularly because I was careful with the people I was kind of like picking. So it's like, where's the disconnect here, but right now I really am just moving on to the next person. Of course I'm talking about this in a specific context, but I do think that this kind of like this, it kind of like implies that in all other contexts I'm kind of okay with being rejected. Yeah, also, and a lot of this has to do with like with me being kind of, I guess, like comfortable and contented with myself and the way I am, and not really be expecting any more than what I can give one day at a time. Like yeah, like with me being okay with myself now, it doesn't bother me. Even thinking, for example, let's say my parents were to reject me, like yeah, of course that would make me sad, but like it wouldn't be the end of the world for me as it would be when I was like 18. Like I'm kind of okay. I'm not okay with that, but as I said, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So growth, development, really happy with myself here. Okay, so the result is that the average eights become blocked in their ability to connect with people or to love, since love gives the other power over them, rewriting their basic fear. I will say that this thing of like caring more, like I've always been proud. Not right now necessarily because I'm like in a healthy state of mind, but like when I was younger, I've always been proud to always be the one that cared less. I gave less of a fuck, and that is not great. That's not good for you. But it was, I guess, like my way of being on top of the situation. But honestly, like I think I'm in such a good place with myself that even if I did admit to kind of like, but that I'm not gonna lie, there's still something that I kind of fear, and I can tell that by some of the fantasies I have and the way that things play out and the way that I am and what is happening, and I'm like, yeah, I still fear that a little bit. I don't want to be the one that cares more, but it is not, once again, it would not be the end of the world if somebody like cared about me less, particularly because I have like, I guess, not self-respect, that like if that was the situation I would just walk away from it, like I'm not trying to kind of like be mean to other people who kind of like stay there in those situations, but like, yeah, that wouldn't be me. It would be a very like, okay, this is it, let's move on. Naturally, I say this without having to actually experience the situation in itself. It's mostly like hypothetical, but like based on everything else about me and my personality, like I have no reason to believe that wouldn't be the case. Okay, the more eights build up their egos in order to protect themselves, the more sensitive they become to any real or imaginary slight to their self-respect, authority, or preeminence. Interesting, because once again, it's something that I would just have described me when I was like 22, 23. Not so much right now, because like I'm a very egotistical person. I'll be the first to kind of like admit that, but like not in a way that I think gets in the way of my experience. As a human being, it's not really. I mean, sometimes I'm very egotistical. Sometimes it does get in the way. It was usually like associated with mania, just like talking about me somewhere. I mean, maybe you could argue that my fantasies are an example of like my ego getting in the way. But yeah, so but it is interesting because like I always have had high expectations and high hopes for myself. And like I think right now they're way more realistic, because when I say high, I mean like impossibly high, not like doable high. And the thing about ice imaginary slide is so real, because like right now I can kind of look back and see like this is a real slide, or this was like something I imagined, but like having those two conflict, it just shows that you need to do some work on have to work on yourself when that is the case. But like my answer, but yeah, self-respect, authority, and preeminence, like perfectly sums it up. Yeah, so you kind of like build up your ego to protect yourself. That's an interesting way of putting it, because I talked about this before, how when I was, for example, in middle school and high school, I would, whenever I had a situation where I failed, whether that was like an actual failure or just a failure to me, because sometimes I would get like an 8.5 out of 9, and that is not a failure. Most people wouldn't say it, but I wanted a 9, so that was a failure to me. And then whenever I had these situations, I would kind of like project it to like this future version of myself. I would create this, what I called a plan at the time, and it's just more of a fantasy, or a dream. That never came true, and just projected into that, and then I would really deal with it. And that was a part of like building up my ego, because basically this version of myself in the future became increasingly more powerful and more competent, and more accomplished and more everything. So like basically I had the ego of like that version of myself, which it didn't correspond to like my actual existence, but it is what it is. Yeah. So anyways, the more they attempt to make themselves impervious to hurt or pain, whether physical or emotional, the more they shut down emotionally to become hardened and rock-like. Yeah, sums it up perfectly. Like the thing I was talking about, how at a certain point it was like I don't want to be crybaby anymore, and then basically I just decided to stop crying, and that kind of happened. I mean, it required a certain level of like effort, for that to be the case. I had to kind of like numb myself to things, and that was me for like a decade. For over a decade actually, and yeah, but anyways, but that's pretty much you kind of like you hurt yourself, like you create this, specifically emotion, in my case specifically emotional, you create this pain, so you get numb to it, so like when it happens, if it happens, it is not, you know, like it doesn't affect you, you know, as, you know, you basically, like, it doesn't affect you because you're numb, not because you have properly processed that. I think that's the difference between myself right now and myself in the past. Like, I'm not numbing myself in pain. I'm just, you know, embracing the pain and processing it, and then coming, you know, on the other side much better, you know, without that thing affecting me. Naturally, this is, you know, easier to say than do. So, you know, it's not always like this, but, you know, it's becoming increasingly more like this. Okay, so when mates are emotionally healthy, however, they have a resourceful, can-do attitude, as well as a steady inner drive. They take the initiative and make things happen with a great passion for life. Yeah, the great passion for life is just very conditional on my mental health. They are honorable and authoritative, natural leaders who have a solid, commanding presence. I really want to say that this is me because this is what I crave to be, but like, I don't know, like in my fantasies I'm kind of like doing a good job, but like real life, like I haven't had that many situations where I can, you know, be honorable and authoritative. I don't know about honorable. I mean, kind of, yes, like I have the things that are important to me, but it's just that some of the things that people, they feel like they're part of their honor, like I don't care so much about. So I think there's a lot of people who are very honorable, or we would call honorable, that would probably think that I'm a little dishonorable. But you know, regarding the things I care about and I believe in, like I guess I would be honorable. Also authoritative. It's interesting because they're using authoritative as a positive, and you know, I would have thought that that would be a negative, but you know, I like that as a positive. So I would like to be a natural leader who has a solid commanding presence. Like I really kind of crave that, honestly. Like that is something that would make me feel fulfilled. The groundness gives them abundant common sense, as well as the ability to be decisive. I would say I do find myself to be decisive, and you know, it is something that has changed because at a certain point when I was younger, I was kind of indecisive. You know, not necessarily regarding, like I talk about this bigger things, I could make decisions. Smaller things like, you know, what ice cream flavor do I want? I would usually get kind of like, oh my god, there's so many flavors, so many possibilities. And you know, like that is something that since then I've been able to really, you know, change. I would say that, you know, I'm good at making decisions, even like hard ones, you know. I just, sometimes I do need a little time to think, but it's only to reflect, find the best solution, best outcome. But yes, I'm decided as opposed to when I was younger, when I struggled with some decisions. Aces are willing to take the heat, knowing that any decision cannot please everyone. Yeah, like I don't really mind taking the heat, honestly. Like, it goes back to the whole thing of like, you know, like, because as I said, I talked about this before, like there are a lot of things that I don't really have a very concrete opinion because it doesn't really matter to me. But the things that do matter, like I do have to take a stance, and I will do what I think is right. And I don't mind, I guess, like the heat that comes from that. You know, honestly, I think the only way that it kind of like affects me a little bit is that it kind of like gets in the way of me making money. Not just making money in general, but like if that compromises, you know, like my livelihood, you know, like that is something that would not. I wouldn't love that. But you know, just taking the hit, people just saying shit, like, yeah, I don't care. But as much as possible, they want to look after the interests of the people in their charge without playing favorites. Their youth, their talents, and fortitude to construct a better world for everyone in their lives. I would say so. You know, I say everyone in my life, not just the people who exist in my life directly, the people who I have some kinship to. And you know, and that kinship might be not necessarily like a direct connection, but you know, like we're together in this journey as part of like the same group, for example. Yeah. So anyways, there is like an audio of Don Rizzo discussing type 8, and there's like the levels of development. But I'm gonna wrap this video up here because I already talked a lot. It's already over an hour long, and that is like way too long. But you know, I'm glad I was able to read this because as I talked about before, like this is really good for my psyche. It's really good for, you know, my mental health. You know, reflecting, and you know, like I think I get to get stuff out of my system, stuff that I didn't even know that I had out there to get out. So like it's really good for me, and I'll be doing more. There's more here. Anyways, bye.